Hello and welcome to the Warp Shelf. I'm Frank Duran.
I'm Sean Vasquez.
We are two artists reaching into the pile of,
let's say, movies, films, TV, comic books, just any sort of general art, anything that sort of moves you. And we talk about what's worth taking with you. That can be either physically or spiritually, in a sense.
Spiritually. And today we are back on our bullshit. No, I'm just kidding. We are back on the AFI Top 100. If you've been listening to the show, we've had episodes where we've been going through the top 100, the American Film Institute's top 100 films of all time. And now strictly they take American films made in America, and that's what this list is comprised of. So there's not many foreign films on here, or even foreign directors even. So it is, but it is a very interesting list, and it's a more concrete list than, say, IMDb's top 250 or
yes, which is completely determined by fluid voting. So like the bottom especially tends to shift a lot, because we originally going to do that, and because that like bottom constantly shifts around, we like switch to this.
We're switching to this, and they don't even update this every year. To be fair, I didn't see a new list for 2024 or anything like that. So it's a very set list that they are very confident
this
in.
We're working off the 10th anniversary one. It's been way longer since the 10th anniversary, and it's remained unchanged.
And that's kind of a cool thing. First off, because you guys can keep looking at this list for a while to come and still know that which ones we're talking about. But also, it means that there's not a new movie suddenly upsetting this list completely, which I kind of dig. And it leads to us talking about films that we normally wouldn't talk about on this podcast, because me and Deshaun met in film school, that's we're students of film. You saw our last episode was us going through all the movies and TV and video games we played last year. And it was a really long episode, not our longest, because the last year before was our longest of episodes at 2 hours and 40 minutes, but this was shorter.
This could have been comparable. This probably actually would have been longer had I didn't have a hard out at a certain time. I was trying to fucking lightning round the last bit of it. If I just had all day free, it probably would have been a longer episode.
Yeah, I was editing it and I was like, this could have gone on so much longer. We could have gone on, but of course. That means we have plans for next year where maybe we'll start the episode with our top 10 to keep it more,
organized.
This is the good.
Those episodes are always tough because it's always like, here's the highlights of what we saw. But then we get on tangents of just like, what's really underrated? Also, speaking of, this thing reminded me of this story.
Yeah, so if you're into long rambling, the yearly wrap-up episodes are absolutely it. But today, we're concentrating on The French Connection, directed by William Friedkin.
Which is number 93.
93. And is this 1971?
71.
Yes, 1971. Gene Hackman, Roy Schneider, William Friedkin. This is a movie that I saw, and I'll start off with my personal history of this movie, is I saw this for the first time in film school and was blown away. I immediately fell in love. I was like, holy crap, this is crazy, because of how well done the chase scenes are. And I will still argue, and I will say, the number one reason to see this movie is to see the chase scenes, and especially the chase scene under the train in Chicago. That is,
the car chase.
It's hard to beat it. And it's one of those things that you might want to watch this movie to understand what a lot of movies are referencing The French Connection with a lot of their chase scenes. A most recent example, the Batman definitely loved The French Connection.
For sure.
Absolutely was a big French Connection fan.
Directors like Fincher or Spielberg who have cited it directly as influences on, say, Seven and Munich.
Yes. And it's one of those things that in a 2024 lens, it might be, and we'll get into that, what this movie's a little bit harder to watch, but it is one of those things that if you're looking at film history, this is one of the most influential and best chase scenes, and one of the more just grounded cop stories that you will see. Nothing too fantastical, nothing too crazy, nothing no, like even the chase scenes it seems very real and down to earth. They're not it's not something he couldn't do, you know, like this isn't some
Yeah.
big action star.
You,
This is Gene
and you also
Hackman,
had to,
guys. Like,
and you also have to put it in the lens of which it was made, which, you know, is often not a
yes.
defense of stuff that doesn't hold up, but it also helps to put you in the right like mindset for it. Like
Yeah.
this is a film that's portraying like a trash-ridden, dirty, almost shot like a documentary version
Mm.
of New York City in the 70s. And remember, this is even older than Taxi Driver.
Yeah. So this is in the 70s it starts that like anti-establishment films. They start to pop up like Taxi Driver, and French Connection is not exactly anti-establishment, but it's definitely not looking at our heroes in, you know, of Gene Hackman, Popeye, and his partner. What's Roy Schneider's name in there? Buddy. Like they are not. We are not looking at these guys as some
Yeah,
hero cop. You know,
they're
like
not
this is
idealized.
they're not idealized, and they're doing bad shit. You know, like that's what I originally loved when I watched, was that these were not good cops. And it's like funny watching in a 2024 lens, and you're kind of like, of course they're not good cops, but you're like, you know, like you're just like and it does feel like
But, you know, presenting
even
that idea in the early
yes
70s.
in the early 70s of
Because there
how
is
no, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say there is a specific flavor of bleak in 70s
Yeah.
cinema.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Where they're like, no, this is everything's bad, you know,
Like
all
a
the way
lot of
through.
70s movies are very cynical. There was
Yeah,
like a bitterness in the 70s.
and I feel like this movie has a lot of that, where it's obvious that like the movie is made in response to how bad the drug culture is getting, you know, like and but also in a response to the overreaction that the cops are having to the drug problems, you know, like, and obviously overstepping their bounds and doing illegal shit that you know, like just to get a bust, you know, like, and of course in the 70s you could look at it as like, oh, at least they're stopping the drugs, but you're like, yeah, but they violated everyone's civil liberties to do it, you know, like, I'm sorry. Like
Mm-hmm.
but you know, like that's I think it's quite interesting to look at it that way in, you know, in a world where I grew up in the 90s, where it's like drugs are bad, kids don't touch the drugs, to like where the 70s was being like holy crap, what is this, you know, like what's going on, you know, like a little bit, but then
Where's the DARE program? It could have
yeah, where's
saved
the
them.
dare program, it could have saved them. But I think it's French Connection does a good job of kind of showing both sides to this drug problem in a way, and but also still being like, yeah, but the bad guys are just straight up scumbags, you know, like the actual dealers shipping from France are assholes, you know, like they're just trying to make as much money as possible by fucking everyone over. And, you know, like, and
Yeah.
you're like, yeah. And they even kind of say it in the movie, like the chief cop is yelling at them that like, what are you doing just getting collars for a guy with a doobie, like get an actual dealer, you know, like actually get these people, you know, like, and I like the attitude, because that wasn't the attitude in the 90s. The 90s switched that around and was like, the drug users are bad, you know, like the people taking the drugs are morally corrupt, instead of being like, hey, maybe the people that introduced it to the fucking streets are the actual morally corrupt people here, you know, like, but you know.
And then, you know, sometimes perpetuated on a higher political level, aka like
Yes.
Nixon and Reagan.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, but and I think that's an interesting part to all this, is that we do not get a just kind of hero idealized look at these cops. Like, not only are they doing bad things, but like Gene Hackman is not exactly living, Popeye's not exactly living a nice life, like he's
No.
not exactly, being taken care of by the city of Chicago or anything like that. Like
New
it
York.
is a New York. So is okay. Sorry,
It's New York. Yeah.
Yes,
For
you're right.
sure.
You're right. Sorry, my bad. Yep, my bad. Because it's of course. Sorry, I started. I also started the French Connection 2 this morning, which I had never seen actually. So I was kind of like, I was like,
Yeah,
whoa,
that's often just one that people forget it exists.
yeah.
Because it's following you. Anytime you do a sequel to like a very iconic standalone movie, for the most part, it is either forgotten or just rubs people the wrong way. It's like, we don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, and I, it's one of those that like, I gotta say, I'm only like 45 to an hour into the movie. It's not bad, like it's definitely not the French Connection, but it is.
Yeah,
not,
I think that's
it's not bad. It's kind of like RoboCop
exactly...
2, where you're like this isn't bad, but it's not RoboCop, like sure, like I get that.
I think
except
Ebert
RoboCop 2 is better than
No, it
French
isn't.
Connection 2. Like no,
not
better than RoboCop. I was gonna say better than RoboCop, but
we were about to fight.
we're about to fight, but I did enjoy RoboCop 2. I assumed I wouldn't, and I was just kind of there to watch it for Frank Miller. But then I was kind of like, oh, this is fun. This is kind of like an actual comic book translated, where it's kind of funny. They like kind of try. So French Connection is loosely based on a true story, like it's not exactly a true story, but it's loosely based on one. But 2 is definitely just kind of like, well, what do? We got to make the characters do something, like, so they kind of make up
I think
a story,
I think Ebert put it that way too, where it's just like, it's not the French Connection, but he had also said that like for what it is, it's better than a lot of imitators that tried to be the French Connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say the number one thing that stood out to me right away, though, when you go to the French Connection 2, is how good the soundtrack is in French Connection 1, because 2 just is like, like it's just like, it sounds bad. It's not a good soundtrack. They kind of try to speed it up to make it more thrillery, the soundtrack, and it's just ain't it, like, which is sad because the French Connection soundtrack is fantastic. It's moody. It brings you in. It does this. They do this great thing where like, and it's just like visual and audio cues that they're doing. But sometimes like when he's at the bar and he's looking over at the table, with Buddy. Popeye looks over and just stares, and there's this like musical cue of him concentrating, and like that's those type of musical cues have really faded out in cinema, like just this kind of like inner monologue music that can sometimes happen in older movies that they just don't really do anymore, because it has to be an OST, it has to be a full song that plays underneath the scene, like it like. But here we have these little like musical stings that are like Popeye thinking, or like, like,
there is
or
often
a bad guy doing
a sense
something.
with the way we do soundtracks and scores in movies now, where they want it to be kind of unobtrusive, like they want it to enhance but subtly, kind of keep it in the background, add to the atmosphere, but don't stand out.
And in French Connection, they deliberately will amp up the like, bring the sound up, bring the soundtrack up, and literally, even with the subtitles on, take away dialogue. Like you will see when they're doing the like kind of just following them and trying to see what they're doing, they usually get rid of the lot of the dialogue that the suspects they're following are saying. Or even when they're riding there's like another scene later where they just completely remove the dialogue, and even the subtitles say inaudible dialogue, and the soundtrack just plays. And I gotta say, I dig the integrity of that, like not everything needs to be fucking heard, like not every little bit needs a dialogue piece or something. It can be the soundtrack holding
things can go without saying. It's that old adage that an actor will say, it's just like, oh, I can do this all in a look.
Yes. And really, I give it there. Now, Now let's give it. Now let's talk about the actors here, because I feel like, I mean, of course, William Friedkin is killing it. This is one of his best movies. I mean, and that's saying something next to the fucking Exorcist. You know, like this is one of his best, no question. And but Gene Hackman and Roy Schneider are such a great pair in this. I feel like it's like one of those like classic, it just works, you know, like they are obviously buddy cops, you know, like they, even in that first scene when they're interrogating that guy who slashed him with the knife, just the way they like stop each other from kicking his ass seems so real compared to you know, like you know, and what could be happening, you know, like in a lot of modern buddy cop movies. And you got to give credit there. Is Gene Hackman flawless in this performance or in French Connection 2? No, I think that there's some moments where he kind of stops acting, but then and he just kind of like does what he's doing. But but then again, there's action scenes. There's him like fighting the other cops. There's a lot of great acting from Gene Hackman here. Don't get me wrong, I am not shooting him down, but I think that even though Roy Schneider is the smaller role here, he's extremely good. I mean,
this was before Jaws, because Jaws wasn't until what, 74, 75?
I think so.
Yeah, it's definitely pre-Jaws.
75. So it is pre-Jaws. That's pretty crazy. I mean, if I saw him in this, I'd be like, yeah, he's the sheriff of. I'd be like, yeah, he's going to be the sheriff in my.
And it is interesting movie, that you make the note for Hackman. I do wonder how much of this film on set they were allowed to riff, because again, the way it's shot, it looks like a documentary, especially the way documentaries were made in that period. Like, it is very guerrilla. It's very gross.
Which is funny.
It's very just like earnest.
It's very guerrilla, but like the minute I started French Connection 2 and they had like the shaky camera as somebody was walking towards the camera, I was like, this ain't it, homies. You guys are trying a little too fucking hard, you know, like you're just like, there's that's genuine the thing here. Yes.
There's like genuine, like, this is guerrilla style. We need to get the shots we can. We can't get a steady cam, as opposed to like, oh, that was the style of the first film, so we now have to emulate that.
Yes. And I think that very much happens here, is that like French Connection is effortless in a lot of ways. Like it just is the way it is. And it starts off right from the get-go where they don't explain anything. You just see this, you don't know it, but a French cop trying to follow around our main bad guy, and then he gets shot to kind of show that like you can't just follow around this guy, you know, like very early on. But they don't say any of that. You just see this random guy walking around looking at obviously following this pair of dudes, and then he just gets shot by one of the pair of dudes, and you're like, and if you're not paying attention to the visual language that's happening there, phew, you know, like it's gonna go fucking over your head, you know. Like,
it is one of those movies that would prime those viewers who are just like, wait, what happened? What is this? The ones who like can't internalize anything and just wait a fucking second.
Dude, when you sent me that meme, like, have you not seen a picture before? It reveals the information to you. I fucking laughed for 10 fucking minutes. Like,
every time.
That is such a perfect response to, so what's gonna happen next? You're like, well, it's a movie, so things will keep happening. Keep watching. Like, you're just like, what the fuck? Because it's so true. As like a big movie guy, it is such like when somebody asks me like what's gonna happen next, you're like, I'm here with you, homie. You know, like, I don't know, you know, like, what is that
You
about?
see, it's fine for you to ask that question, but that question is supposed to be up here. You're supposed to internalize that. Your brain is supposed to go, what's going to happen next? And the movie will piece that puzzle out for you. It's not something you need to say or ask out loud.
And I will say, a lot of this movie does not spoon anything to you. Like, a lot of the dialogue is very much, and it's just one of those movies that, and I love this, when it's all just in universe. We don't have some new guy coming in that has to explain what's happening, you know, like some fantasy novel. Like, this is just happening, and it is the way that it is, and nobody's explaining shit, and that's okay, because guess what? As a smart watcher, you can just pick up what the fuck is happening and keep watching. Like, it's just I enjoy that part of this movie.
Yeah.
It is not like heavy-handed in that aspect. But
lo and behold, when you give a film its full attention, it's easier to pick up on things.
I will say I got to give credit to Fernando Rey, who plays the main bad guy. I do think he just has one of the most iconic faces of all time, you know, like he just looks like a French bad guy, you know, like you see him and you're like, yep. Like, you know, like,
the shot of him waving by in the window on the train, like, it's like burned into my brain.
And then same thing for Marcel Boussif, who plays Pierre, who they chase through the whole subway system. He is just perfect, you know, like it's one of those things that he just is that, you know, like a character actor that just is, you know, like, and that's just good casting, you know, like that
in
is
a role
that's
that you
just
could
good casting.
In a role that could have felt like underwritten. Just like,
right.
Oh, this is just the archetype that we put in. And it's one of those things where, like, you can get an actor who can do a lot with very little.
Yes, exactly. Now, this movie, it's not exactly fast at the beginning, you know, like I'm talking about these chase scenes, but it's not exactly a slow burn, I will say. It's because I don't think this is a slow burn movie. It's is kind of one of those things that it starts off with.
It's less than
basis.
2. It's only an hour 45. It did feel longer to me the second time around, but that's only because, like, it's a movie I've seen before, even though I hadn't watched it since around, like, college either. And it was less that the film was long and felt long, and more just other shit on my mind. Because I'm just like, because my mind was just like, I want to play Persona 3 Reload right now. Why does this less than 2 hour movie feel like it's going on for 4 hours? It's like, yeah, it's because I want to play my video games. But it's not actually a problem with the movie.
I will say that, like, it's one of those things that they're staking it out. At first, we're just kind of seeing their beats, like what they're doing on their beat, and then they get the assignment, and then it's staking out. But then once we hit the, like, once we hit the stakeout, though, I feel like, because we're introducing everything that's going on, but once we hit the stakeout, it's kind of this very fast rush to all of a sudden we are getting too close to the suspect, you know, like, and it just becomes this, like, we're getting too close, and then it explodes with them, with him being like, okay, take care of this guy, you know, like, and then we run into the sniper scene that leads into the chase, that leads into the ultimate bust. So it's one of those things that it fucking moves. Even after the chase scene, though, you go, wait, are we going back to the pace from before? Because we can't do that. That chase was crazy, you know, like, what I just saw should have been an end of a movie, you know, like, and they're like, no, we still got the end of the movie coming up. You know,
and I have heard people argue that maybe they played their best card too early, because that is, like, less than halfway into the movie, the big car chase.
I will say, and it's like, there's still half an hour left after the scene ends, so you're kind of like, you're sitting there going, wait, so where do we go?
There's an emotional, like, bleak climax to the film in the way it's effective, but if you're going in there for, like, spectacle and scope, then you're not really gonna top what you get in, like, the middle.
Yeah, I agree.
And I have seen people, like, criticize it for that. It's just like, well, I feel like I got all revved up for that for that middle, and then the rest is just kind of back to basics.
I will say that, but I feel like when we're talking about the bleakness of this movie, that the ending is pretty much what sums it up. You know, like, the ending of Popeye kind of losing it, even at the end there, where he's just so driving to be able to stop this guy that he doesn't care. He's killed 2 other cops, and he doesn't really care. He's like, I'm gonna get this guy no matter what, like, and he doesn't and we kind of just get, he doesn't stop, like, he has to be taken off of it to be able to get stopped, like, and then French Connection 2 starts, and obviously he's not fucking stopped, like, he's just still unhinged and doing whatever he wants,
but that's
like,
almost like
in France now.
it's almost the problem with the way we enforce police, just in a microcosm. Like, he's literally hurting even fellow police officers around him to like try and get his guy.
And really it comes down to what are we forcing our cops to do? Because back in the 70s and into the 90s and even now, we force them to literally go to war against these people. Like, they are literally planning out how they're going to take these people down, not in just a clean way, but in a way that will make sure that they get these guys and take them out, like, and even to the point of actually killing them, like, straight up shooting these people, like, and not that they weren't drawing guns on the cops here, like, that's obvious that these cops
but it's just the idea
right
that, like,
back,
you put any person in that psychological state as a career, where it's something that they confront on a daily basis. Eventually that's going to wear down, and you start to see anyone as a potential threat.
Yeah, and that's really it, is that we're basically asking these guys who go 6 months of training or maybe that, to be a cop, to go to war, basically, and put yourself in PTSD inducing situations constantly, like, stuff that will keep you up at night. And I don't blame you for that. Like, it's one of those things that these people are being put in dangerous situations constantly, and I don't blame the reaction they're having to it. It's that we shouldn't be putting these people in these situations, constantly. Because, like, seeing one dead body will fuck somebody up for life, like, that's literally the plot of Stand By Me, like, seeing one fucking dead body fucks you up. Imagine how many a New York cop sees, like, in a week, like, and it's one of those things that, like, I'm definitely not siding with them on this, like, but I will say,
and plus
the pressures we put them through is immense, and too much.
And it's also healthy to recognize that if you look at police from a historical standpoint, the origin of them were basically just glorified bodyguards for the rich.
Yes. And that's pretty much what they are now. But they kind of do that in this movie, where Popeye and Buddy are just kicking the crap out of one black bar, like, they just keep going in and just and busting it up, like, and it's obviously not a big bust every time or doing anything. They are just it's just like kind of their reaction to their situation, like, they just keep reacting, and that's obviously not an okay profession or / thing to do to our public servants, like, is really it, because and really here it shows that, like, how much these cops are being used to just keep black people beaten up, like, it is like, that is obviously what they're trying to allude to here at the beginning of the movie, and maybe it was not as loudly said in the 70s, but it is obviously alluding to that, like, like,
I mean, we know now what the war on drugs really was.
It's racism. And I will say that this movie's not exactly great with its like, trying to not be racist. Like, it's obviously trying to show that Popeye and Buddy are racist, and they're using this to, like, to fight the war on drugs. But also the only 2 black cops in this movie get punched or shot, and I don't know what's happening with these balloons. I think they just saw my plus sign, but I don't know what happened there. But I not exactly what I'm talking about racism, and they're like, balloons. Balloons. But Oh god damn it.
Stuff you only get when you watch the video version of the podcast.
Yeah, sorry audios, but please watch it on YouTube. But I will say that like the only we get two black cops in this movie who are like are definitely the movie being like, we're not racist, don't worry, like, and they get punched in the face and then shot later, and you're just like, what the fuck? like, couldn't we have one that lived here or didn't get fucked up? Like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, but
Yeah,
it's the 70s. Again, you got to look at it. It's now, that's 50 years ago, like that's which is crazy to think about, because I always think about the 70s as 20 years ago, but it is
like 20, 30,
yeah.
etc. But time moves on.
Time moves on, and it is 50
again,
years
it
ago.
helps. It helps that, as we said before, like these two cop characters that we follow aren't good guys.
No, and they're not exactly like, they're not. It's like you're not exactly like, oh, I can't root for these guys. They're not anti-heroes, but they're not exactly good, like, and they're not doing a good job at their job either. Like,
they're people.
I think they're people, and I think that's sort of the interesting part about this is how much they were willing to show in the French Connection how much the cops can fuck up, like, and like the scene where they're like, I'm following him on the subway, and he's like, well, I got the hotel locked down like a tent, and they're like, well, he's walking around by himself, like, so it's like, I like that they're able to show that this is all very human, like it's not just some precise business, like, and it's not gonna go perfectly, but that it's also a movie where they shoot, like the sniper scene, they shoot that mother during that scene, and they just never address that again. I will say that would be my only like kind of like what the fuck about this movie. What is it, and the French Connection too, is not only do they treat, like, is there some racist things going on, there's definitely just some big sexist overtones going on here. Just like,
oh, for sure.
Like Popeye is not good to the women in his life, and then he's like, and he just hits on women in the street, like that, and like, and even in French Connection 2, he just bothers some French women just talking to them, and they obviously can't speak English.
Like, assuming Popeye survived, he definitely grew to one of those fucking old men that tells young women to smile.
Yeah, right. And you're like, shut the fuck up. So definitely, I love the French Connection because of its chase scenes, the soundtrack, the acting, the way it is paced, because even though it's strangely paced, I do like it and the way it moves. But there is some problems that in a 2024 lens, you kind of have to look at and be like, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
and even then it's still murky, but it still has like enough self-awareness in and of itself. Yes. And it is very like not only quintessential like neo-noir stuff, but also quintessential just 70s. Because you think about it in terms of like what types of movies we would get up until this point. And I realized when I was writing notes for this that there was like this 4 to 5 year stretch where we got like Bonnie and Clyde, Midnight Cowboy, Easy Rider, and then this. Yeah.
It's the 70s. There's a reason why in film school, one of our teachers just did a whole class on the 70s. Because it is an absolute turning point in film, because it's no longer the studio system. So just a little bit of history, like the studio system kind of collapses in the 50s going into the 60s. So we have this system that is just churning out movies, like making serials, making any movie it can, kind of very similar to now. And then it falls apart. And basically all these guys lose their money. But the good news is that these little filmmakers all of a sudden get the power to make their own films, because film goes from being a very intensive project to carry around and handle to being a lot simpler. So and then we get these like actual handheld shots in the 70s, because the guys are walking around with the cameras for the first time.
Yeah, we can actually hold them.
we can actually hold them instead of actually having to be on a dolly, a truck, a jib, you know, like that is the classic way of setting up a camera, is it has to be on some big thing. And then all of a sudden the 70s carried around on your shoulder,
Yeah,
you know,
and
like
with the studio systems basically collapsing, like there's not nearly as many gatekeepers to be like, no, you can't make that. People won't watch
yeah.
that.
Exactly. And that's how I think we got movies like The French Connection and Bonnie and Clyde, and especially Easy Rider, because imagine pitching Easy Rider in a fucking room, you know, like how do you pitch that movie? You know, like how do you pitch this movie? Like, but it's one of those like absolutely fantastic movies that like film wouldn't be the same without, you know, like, so it's interesting, you know, and especially in a world where we're getting micro budget now, we're getting like shrink how do you pronounce that horror movie, Deshaun?
Oh, Skinamarink.
Skinamarink, thank you. I'm saying the rest of the song.
Shrinky Dinks.
It's just Shrinky Dinks. But I like we're getting those like micro budget movies where people are literally filming their movies on iPhones and literally red cameras and like tiny budget, like sorry, I'm gonna mispronounce that name again.
Skinamarink.
Skinamarink was only shot for $15,000, which is unheard of, you know, like and like even the movies we're talking about in the 70s were hundreds of thousands of dollars, even for like small budget movies, you know, like this wasn't easy, you know, like this is not easy. That's why it was such a big deal when Robert Rodriguez was like, I made El Mariachi for $5,000, because you're just like, that's not fucking possible, you know, like
Clerks was like,
you know, like
Clerks was like less than 20,000.
Exactly. It just it didn't seem possible at the time, and now we're having micro budgets, you know, like that are even smaller, you know, like, and I think that that's very interesting, and it obviously leads to YouTube having a ton of micro filmmakers putting out movies at the tiniest budget, which is very interesting. But you know,
there's always some avenue of freedom that like that just breeds creativity, for better or worse, because sometimes you'll just get super weird shit when there's no one there to tell you now. So you get stuff like in the 70s as the studios are collapsing, then you go into the 80s and 90s and you have like the advent of Betamax and VHS, where people will just get their movie straight into a video store because they don't need to get it into theaters. And that already opens up an avenue. Then you get to the avenue of the internet and say YouTube and other like streaming sites.
Like right now, how are we in a world where a Knuckles, like fully animated Knuckles TV show is happening just on Paramount Plus? Like, it's not going to any major network. It is not coming to TV. It's not coming to movies, theaters or anything. This is a straight up just streaming event type of thing. And it's one of those things that back in the day, they would be like, no, that's too much money to just put on streaming. And I think that's, or, you know, such a small audience, but obviously it's not a small audience anymore. It's the majority of the audience. And that's a kind of weird dichotomy that we have at the moment, where it's like, oh yes, we want you in butts in seats in theaters to make that money, but also they seem to be making plenty fine money from not butts in seats and sitting at home, you know, like, and being okay with it.
It's more like it's like a long-term investment type of thing, because they don't make immediate money, but you know, the more you gather subscribers, you have like sustained income.
And like let's say last year with there was 3 movies up for Best Picture that were just on Netflix, and this year we only have Maestro. But I think that that's quite an interesting you know, like development, is that like these movies are not just streaming only and then we're just being like, get that out of here. These are Best Picture nominees. These are up for the best of the best.
Like, I feel like if American Fiction wasn't so applauded because it's the award season right now, that probably would already be up on Prime Video already. That's an MGM movie. Amazon owns MGM now.
Yeah, thank God.
It's actually
MGM
like,
Plus was garbage. MGM
it's almost
Plus
like
was bad.
It's so funny too, because it's like one of the few times where I'm just like, put the fucking thing on streaming. I already saw it. I already saw it in the movies, and now I want to watch it a million more times. So give it to me.
Oh my God. I feel the same way about Godzilla -1 though. I'm kind of like I've seen it in theaters now. Let me buy it. I'll pay for it on multiple services. Just give it to me.
You just got to go see it again. You got to see the minus color version.
I wanted to. It's out of theaters now. I can't fucking go see it. So it's kind of like
maybe in your
out of options now.
I'll have to check to see if like anywhere closer to Boston has it.
If actually
like if the Alamo Draft House
is
doing it or something.
Because they were supposed to. Toho said out of theaters February 2nd, but I'm kind of interested to see if any theater actually like listened, or if they were just like, no, I'm still making money. Like I don't care. Like they did with yeah, right. Like just like with Barbie, where they were just like, no, it's streaming, but we're still playing it in theaters if you want to go see it.
And to be fair, -1 was in theaters way longer than it was supposed to be.
Oh yeah, -1 is it's
like that made them some fucking bank, so
example.
they kept that around.
But -1 is a good part of this conversation, because it was supposed to be a week. Like they're like, oh, it's expensive to do a theatrical run, but we don't want to just release this on streaming. Let's do a 1 week theatrical run. And then people showed up and supported, and then it went for over a month, which is a lot more money on Toho's side. So they must, they were obviously raking in the money to pay for it. And it just shows that like it really is still about making good stuff and the fans showing up to like the good stuff. Like that's what's going to still work nowadays. It's not just Halo show season 2. Nobody likes this. We're still putting it out. Even though critics hate it, audience hates it, the actor sort of hates it, like everyone sort of hates it, but we're still putting it out because money, like that is, I feel like Halo is that ultimate example of like, please fucking stop. Nobody wants this. It sounds like a dream, like in my head, a young Frank is like, reading the Halo novels being like, oh man, I can't wait till they make this a movie or a TV show. And then if you literally showed him like a clip of this, he'd be like, the fuck was that? Like what the hell? And it's like, it's sad when a video game from the 2000s can outright the hell out of any modern TV show episode. You're kind of like, guys, Halo wasn't exactly immaculately written or anything.
No.
It's just, but somehow it is way better than what you're doing here. Like you're like, come on. But besides the point, French Connection is I feel like it deserves its spot on here. We brought up some issues about it, but that's just a 50-year-old lens, like that is, that's the way I think a lot of these older movies we're going to look at and be like, ooh, about certain things. But I feel like the French Connection still holds up in a lot of ways and is still worth seeing now. So if you're like watching this being like, I haven't seen it yet, and maybe I will get to it, I would recommend it. I do own it on DVD. I thought I had it on Blu-ray. I went through my Blu-ray earlier, but I couldn't find it. But I do have it on DVD somewhere, and I do think that this is a worthwhile own for any film collector. Like this is definitely, if you're into film, if you're into movies, this is a little bit of history that you're going to want to include. Not only because William Friedkin is one of the best directors that ever lived, but because of the chase scene and the way they put this whole movie together, and how effortlessly cool and calm and collected this whole movie is. Like it's just it's done with such purpose. And then when you get to French Connection 2, you're like, not so much purpose here, not as
and
much
there's
purpose.
And there's a genuine griminess that you just don't get anymore.
Yeah,
like you're not gonna get the same effect trying to film in New York now. It's like, what? You're gonna fucking see the M&M store in Times Square and then immediately be pulled out.
You're like, was that a Krispy Kreme? What the hell? like exactly. You're just like,
and then I talked to my mom who grew up in New York when she was a kid. She was born in 73, and she would talk about how like, oh, you couldn't go to Times Square. That was just all fucking porn theaters. Whole stretch. That was not a place to be.
And I feel like that is sort of the fun time capsule of this movie too. If you look back on this as just kind of like a history piece that you're looking at in New York, you don't see anymore. You know,
Yeah, and
like
it's a genuine New York that was still like that to shoot it, as opposed to like movies trying to emulate that, like a Joker.
Yeah, yes, Joker's perfect for that example where they're like trying to make it look like old New York. And definitely a lot of New York looks like old New York still. Like there's obvious that, but there's a little there's something about how we can actually clean things now that didn't happen in the 70s, you know, like actually cleaning up the streets, not in like a drug way, but literal soap and water like is just wasn't happening. We didn't have the public services to clean up New York back then, and I feel like it is
I mean, we do now. We still slack off.
Yeah, still
like when
not
lockdown
great.
when lockdown was in full force, and you had all these you had like all these cities being like, we're gonna clean up the subways now. It's just like, you weren't cleaning them before.
You're like, what do you mean? Like, exactly. Whenever the MBTA posts like, we cleaned the orange trains today, and I'm like, you should be doing that every week. Like, what do you mean? Like this should be a daily occurrence. What the fuck is this about? You know, like,
you guys don't run 24/7 like New York does. You have off time. Clean those fucking cars.
Clean those cars. Yeah, damn. I will say I love the overhead train of old New York. I do think that that's just one of the coolest aesthetic things ever. You know, like it's you know, like it's just so cool looking.
Also, that car chase, which just came to me just now, I just remembered that car chase of like, you know, following the overhead train, totally inspired a fucking mission in GTA 4.
Really?
Because there's a really pain in the ass mission that I remembered where you're literally chasing an overhead train while you're in a car. And it's obviously a pain in the ass because it's Liberty City. It's basically New York. You're dealing with New York traffic and roads.
Oh my God. That's so funny. The other, I will say the other thing that is interesting behind the scenes about this, about the chase scene, is that they like literally just didn't get the permits to do a lot of it. You know, like of course they got permits for like the actual stops, but a lot of the running around in the city was not controlled by,
and
you know, wasn't permits. Like,
and a lot of pickups for the car stuff as well. Like there are stories of how like William Friedkin became the cameraman for those shots like inside the car because, and I quote, some of the cameramen had family.
That's wild.
So Friedkin's just like, I'll do it myself. So if something happens,
like, so they did have New York Police Department's tactical force to like stop major things from like major trucks from coming in, but like normal traffic was just stopped by assistant directors. So there's some real shots here in this movie that they're not actors in the background. That is just straight up people in New York just living their lives as Gene Hackman or a stunt double slams the car around, you know, like it is. And I'm sure William Friedkin hanging off the side of the fucking car, you know, like it's like, you're just like, damn, like it's kind of wild. But
we've brought this up before. There is something to be said about like the dangerousness of filmmaking in the old days.
Yeah. It's kind of like we were saying grittiness, but like, a lot of filmmaking was we're gonna capture this or we're gonna die, you know, like sort of.
Yeah, thing. Even something as simple as like, I want a scene with a tiger in it. CG doesn't exist yet, so we're gonna film with an actual tiger and hope no one dies.
Or bugs of any kind, you know, like that's like, what are you gonna get a train bug? You know, like come on. Other thing that is slightly just like an interesting like real life thing is a lot of like the cop things they do here was based off of real stuff. And one of the more iconic things of him running around as Santa Claus at the beginning was an actual real tactic that cops used in New York, where they would dress up as Santa with their partner nearby and like,
damn.
and do that to people. Like, and you're just like,
As if the Salvation Army, as if the Salvation Army wasn't bad enough. Now they're fucking narcs.
Like, it's just one of those things where you're just like, I totally thought that was a movie thing, you know, like when you watch it, you're like, of course, that's funny, you know, like it's sort of like wild. But then you read about it and you're like, oh no, this was something cops did, you know, like you're just like, oh no. But you know, that's just a fun little tidbit about it, you know?
Yeah, it's hilarious. Darkly hilarious.
Yeah, really darkly hilarious. But I another thing that I will give credit is that I feel like the movie is very realistic. And not only its just setting and the way it does its dialogue and the way it looks and everything, but also just in the way that the like cops kind of react to each other constantly. And I got to give credit. I know that Gene Hackman and Roy Schneider went for like a month of ride-alongs before that to kind of like pick up how New York cops actually interacted with each other. So I feel like if they weren't allowed to ad lib, they were still able to add a lot of what they picked up from that to this, you know, like, so I think that's something that, you know, we still do nowadays.
It's also very telling.
Yes, right. It's
just like, oh, we know how cops act. We know exactly how to act like cops. Ethan Hawke did the same thing for Training Day.
Yes, and he's got some funny stories. I don't know if I think I sent you that clip where he talks about the lady trying to get out of the back of her the cop car and asking him to get him out of it. You know, like I think that's a very interesting story and a damn good point. But it's like that type of like acting where you, before the movie starts, you like kind of go and shadow people is not gone. I will give credit. I feel like that happens in movies nowadays where like if I know that a lot of like high school movies, they will go and stay at high schools. And I know for Tom Holland as Spider-Man, they literally sent him to a New York high school for a month to see how he would do, you know, like, and of course he blew his cover because he's Tom Holland, but like it is still a tactic being used today by today's actors. And I think that's interesting that a lot like you know, acting hasn't changed much in a lot of ways, you know, like it's been 50 years, and we've seen huge advancements in lighting, video cameras, technology, like everything. But acting,
but like
is
the bones of
same.
It remain. Yeah,
that stays very similar. And I think that that's another reason why you should go back to these older movies and see that is that shit doesn't change, you know, like sure, if you go far enough back, you get some old, you know, like people are trying to act big, like they're still on stage, you know, but in like the 1920s movies, but like that slowly goes away as people start to embrace the medium more. And I feel like acting has not changed much in the last 50 years. So in a lot of ways. Now I'm sure I've got some actor in the comments being like, you don't know shit about acting. Like, you know,
I would say
shit about me.
I would say the biggest thing that has probably changed, and maybe to a detriment, depending on who you ask, is the advancement of the way we can capture audio.
Yeah, true.
You get like those clips of like actors practically whispering their lines, which works for the scene because it just feels natural. But then you get a lot of like, you know, people who have flat screen TVs who never got a sound bar just being like, what did they? The amount of people I know, I feel like it's increased so much, the amount of people I know who just watch stuff with subtitles on all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, that happens. Some people have too much sensory issues to not turn on subtitles. So I get that in some ways. But yes, I do feel like sometimes people turn on subtitles because they might miss a dialogue. And that just means they mixed the movie badly, you know, in my opinion. You're just like, hey, you just didn't do it right.
There is like, but I do constantly hear the complaints of just like, why is movie and TV audio so bad now? It's just like, do you have a flat screen TV? Yeah. Did you get any speakers for it? No. It's like, what do you think happened when your speakers turned into this to this?
That's a good point. So if you were interested, guys, if you're interested in what the original book, it is called The French Connection: A True Account of Cops, Narcotics, and International Conspiracy, written by Robin Moore in 1969. But William Friedkin does say it's more of an impression of the case than it is the movie, than it is like that book, like it's not like it's like, as much as The French Connection is a true story, it is more of an impression of a true story than it is like the hard facts,
in the same way that Goodfellas is.
Yeah, where Goodfellas and Wolf of Wall Street, I would feel like, where it's like, it's coming from the person, but like, is the person telling the whole truth, or is he even good at recounting what actually happened, and all that things. I mean, just recently we learned that two movies that I feel like are one that's not changed so much, but another that's changed by it finding out that the person who told it was lying. We have Blindside, who it came out that they were exploiting our main guy in the Blind Side there, that they were using him for money. So that kind of ruins that movie completely. Like, I mean, good, Sandra Bullock is still good in it, but it's kind of one of those things where you're like, so none of the nice feelings that happen in this movie happen at all, like you're like, at all, like, like, I
mean,
and
it could ruin the movie, it could not, depends on who you ask. There are people who still love The Greatest Showman.
Yes, but that's the thing, is I feel like Greatest Showman isn't even hindered by it not being true, like it's just like, well, of course this isn't true, like, but another one that I thought was funny, I saw it on Reddit, people being mad about this not being true, but it's one of those things that I've always thought it wasn't true. Catch Me If You Can. Like, I love that movie. Catch Me If You Can is a fantastic movie.
It's a great movie.
But I never was like, oh, of course, this is absolute truth from the like I never was like, yes, this is the truth. It like sort of is, but like not really. Like,
if it's a narrative production, there's always going to be major caveats. In the same way that, like, when we watch Steve Jobs, obviously all these big confrontations didn't happen specifically before the start of a press conference.
Yeah, right before this press
conference. In fact, it's funny. The real Andy Hertzfeld commented on that film and kind of put it perfectly. He said, none of that happened, but it's 100% true.
See, I like that.
It's like, it didn't happen that way, but you guys kind of nailed the atmosphere and the people.
Yeah, and I feel like, that's what film's all about, baby.
Yeah, and I'm gonna blow your mind, guys. Even documentaries aren't objective truth either. The moment you edit something,
it's changing the truth.
Yeah,
right. Like, I mean, we live in a world where live streaming is just straight from the stream, but a lot of what you're watching has been edited in some way, and that means that somebody put some sort of narrative on it, even if they're doing it subconsciously, like they are putting those things in a certain sequence, and suddenly the truth is not there, like that's important to keep in mind. But guys, The French Connection, absolutely, I think you should own it. Deshaun, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're specifically not a collector and have never seen it, it is streaming on Max. That's the way to find it for right now.
And French Connection too, if you want to just keep that puppy going. But I will say,
if you're morbidly curious, I suppose.
Yeah. But I feel like comparing it to RoboCop and RoboCop 2 is almost the perfect comparison for that, where you're like, iconic movie that changed film. And a sequel that's totally okay, but that's its crime being okay, like you're like, all right, where if I had just watched The French Connection 2, I would have been like, okay, and same thing for RoboCop 2, I would be like, that's fine, but it,
guys,
this is hard.
This is pre-Empire. We didn't quite know how to do sequels yet.
Yeah, now in a world where we're like, of course, we must treat every sequel with such reverence and money. We're going to throw money at every sequel. And that's really the difference, is that they just didn't throw the same amount of money at the sequel.
No, and it was often...
It's not exactly bad. They got a pretty big director for 2 too. Who is it? It's
It was also considered a risk if you waited too long. You had stuff like
yeah.
Son of Kong, which came out months after King Kong, because they figured we have to get it while it's fresh on people's minds or no one's gonna care.
Yes, the director of French Connection 2 is John Frankenheimer, and that's the director of the Manchurian Candidates and the Island of Dr. Moreau, which isn't as good but just as famous. You know, like, so like we're not talking like they didn't pull out
Like they
absolutely like
they pawned this off on
this.
some like poor up and comer.
Yeah, like they absolutely tried to give some reverence to French Connection 2, and but it just isn't the same. But you'd be surprised because they still did bring back pretty much everybody but Roy Schneider, but he was shooting Jaws that year, so you really can't.
Yeah,
blame
same composer too, which is funny that you were making notes about the music.
Because
Yeah.
I did not. I was like, this is not the same. I don't like it. Like I was like, this isn't right. Like I was like, oh, this is just missing the point. But that's funny. That's the same one because I felt like I must have missed with this one because it was much better in the first one.
But the point is, you can see French Connection on Max, and maybe even check out like William Friedkin's other stuff, because I think this is the only Friedkin film on the AFI list. Because I was looking for like The Exorcist, and The Exorcist isn't on there.
Huh?
So like,
that's wild.
Watch The Exorcist. He also did a remake of 12 Angry Men that we'll probably bring up when we get to 12 Angry Men.
Yep, and of course he's famous for To Live and Die in L.A. and and
he considers Sorcerer one of his best films. I've been meaning to watch that for a while.
I've never watched Sorcerer. Me neither. I would love to watch that movie actually because it looks. I mean, anything with Tim Curry, I'm down for, you know, like, and that movie seems insane. Wait, I'm thinking of a different movie. Sorry.
Are you thinking of Legend?
I'm thinking of Legend. I am. But I recognize this poster for Sorcerer where it's the truck falling off of a wooden bridge.
Yes.
Yeah, one of those iconic posters. Oh yeah. No, I'm into watching this. This sounds dope. Like might have to,
I've been meaning to. I just haven't like pulled the trigger on it yet. Because after William Friedkin died, there was a lot of like interviews that like resurfaced for him, and there was this whole thing with Sorcerer because that was like one he was like constantly butting heads with the studio about.
Really? That's fun.
But he considered it like, if not his best work, like one of his best works.
Which is wild because he did those 3 in a row. He did The French Connection, The Exorcist, and Sorcerer all in the 70s. Like that is insane, you know, like that's pretty fucking incredible, you know, like that just shows how much of a powerhouse he was in the 70s. You're like, damn, my man, that's fucking insane.
Yep.
But yeah, and I'm gonna have to watch that remake of 12 Angry Men because it's definitely got a high rating, you know, like it's not
I've seen it before. It's been a long time. It's not the Sidney Lumet original.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, the Sidney Lumet original isn't even the original because it was a remake. It was a teleplay.
Yep.
Which thankfully we'll talk about 12 Angry Men. It's on the AFI list. I'm super excited to talk about it when we get there.
Yes, when we get there. Now, Deshaun, do you know off the top of your head what's the next one on the list here? I'm
pretty sure the next one is Goodfellas at 92.
Oh hell yeah! So we're gonna be talking about a movie that I am overly passionate about. It's like I love Goodfellas.
I tell you what,
excited to talk about I'm gonna rewatch.
This is gonna be.
Make sure.
I wasn't gonna say that. I wasn't worried about that, but you should watch because 1, it's not on the list, and 2, it's always compared to it, and you still haven't seen it. It would be a good talking point. Casino. Yeah.
That's true. I knew exactly the minute you were like, you haven't seen it. I was like, Casino. It's one of those, like, it's one of my missing, like those, like, you know, you watch a lot of movies in your lifetime, but there's still holes. Everyone has weird holes in their film knowledge. And Casino's one of them for me. So, definitely want to get to that. So yeah, it'll 92. So this was 93, French Connection. 92 is Goodfellas. Then one I haven't actually seen, 91 is Sophie's Choice. So I
saw it once a very long time ago. So it's definitely worth rewatching.
to round out the 90s, I actually have it on Blu-ray, Swing Time. So I'm excited to talk about that one too.
That'll be a first time for me. I've never seen Swing Time.
Really? That's a good. We're gonna talk about it, but it's a good time. But guys, thank you for supporting these. These are one of our most popular episodes, the AFI Top 100s, and I'm sure that's because everyone's looking up the AFI Top 100. But I really do support. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for your support on these episodes, and I hope you check out other episodes of our podcast because we usually cover what's coming out, but we also like this kind of look back in film history sort of thing.
It's an ongoing challenge.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of fun for guys who've seen so many fucking movies. It's kind of wild when I open up IMDb and you go to your ratings section, and you're like, how many fucking movies have I seen? Right now it says I've rated over 1,831 movies, and I'm sure that's way under what I've actually seen because I have forgotten to rate things, on IMDb. So.
I would love to know what the actual total of the amount of movies or seasons of TV
when you get to the pearly gates and Peter's like, you were fine with your sins, but you did watch 2,500 movies, and you're like, yeah. But guys, thank you so much for your support on these. Thank you for supporting the show. Make sure you make the algorithm work. Hit the buttons down below. But if you want to watch the show, be sure to check us out on the Galaxy of Geek YouTube page. And if you want to see the audio version or listen to the audio version, we're pretty much everywhere. And if we're not everywhere, you can just go to galaxyofgeek.com to listen to the audio version. It's right there, right next to the video version. So you can listen while you're driving or
listen or chilling. Watch the balloon cut.
Yes, I watched the balloon cut. And guys, if you want to check out our own personal social medias, I am Yep Frank or Yep Gundam on Instagram.
And I am Mod Karika pretty much everywhere. I had mentioned the media thread that I'm doing on Threads. I'm up to almost 60 now.
Holy shit.
For movies I've watched, television seasons I've watched, games I've beaten, etc. I'm racking it up.
The man racking it up. So check that out. And guys, again, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
We'll see you next time.
Adios. Adios.